fueling recovery, increasing resilience, and boosting economic development in the greater Caribbean region. Now, my legislative staff and communications team have required portions for me to read, so let me quickly get past those, so I can talk about what's really been rattling in my mind as I drove around the island I live on, St. Croix, yesterday with President and Madam Secretary. So here's the important information. Much of our country and this region were impacted by extreme weather and unprecedented natural disaster over the past 2 years. The 2017 hurricane season was one of the worst on record. Hurricanes Irma and Maria alone impacted hundreds of American communities and devastated our Caribbean islands. Among the hardest places hit were here in the Virgin Islands of the United States, where homes, possessions, and businesses, along with utility systems and essential facilities like hospitals and schools, were lost. Large swaths of the revenue base necessary for normal operations collapsed. With the level of destruction that occurred, lawmakers in Washington on both sides of the aisle became more supportive of modifying how the federal government responds to such disasters, as well as how the United States builds and maintains infrastructure in order to mitigate against future natural disasters to help reduce the damage caused and its cost. The disaster bill from these storms included an important provision to allow the Virgin Islands, along with our sister U.S. territory, Puerto Rico, to utilize federal assistance from FEMA to rebuild critical infrastructure to be more resilient in order to withstand future storms. Congress recognized the importance of creating resiliency in the first instance rather than continually rebuilding, fiscally and socially responsible. The U.S. House of Representatives continues to work on these areas through our negotiations in an infrastructure bill. Yes, I believe that will actually happen in the fall or winter of this year. The Select Committee on Climate Crisis, as well as legislation such as the Disaster Recovery Reform Act of 2018. That act is a transformative and modernization of the Robert T. Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act, intended to provide more significant and regular investment in pre-disaster mitigation activities as well as a fund, and to hasten recovery in communities devastated by disaster. It also encourages communities to build back to the most recent, strongest consensus-based standard. Despite positive steps, much more remains to be done. One of the most pressing issues is the massive amounts of federal assistance that continues to sit idle. There is a great disparity in what has been approved by Congress and what is actually on the ground in the communities it was intended for. As you look at all of the after-action reports from GAO, the Inspector Generals, and others, you'll see this as a constant theme. The bureaucracy and red tape, along with the belief by some in the executive branch that dispersal of funds should only be given with unreasonable contingencies and, quote, skin in the game, because then those areas will only take on the bare minimum, and what they absolutely need translates into appropriated funds taking so long to reach the ground that the affected communities are unsure whether they will ever see long-term recovery dollars. There are temporary FEMA dollars for temporary housing, hotels, food distributions, etc., but the things needed to look good when the cameras are focused on the disaster. But disaster communities have no idea if they're ever going to get long-term rebuilding dollars or not. So this leads me to the portion that I've been thinking about. Why these gatherings here, like today, are so important, particularly for us here in the Virgin Islands. Let me explain to you that you're in a place that has been a tremendous place of commerce and activity. It's the only place in the United States that Columbus actually set foot on, repelled, of course, by Native people. It has been the home of some of the most famous pirates, has one of the oldest synagogues in the Western Hemisphere, believing in religious tolerance for economic purposes. Such a small place, and we've given the U.S. through our people the finances for the American Revolution, the development of the mind that created the US banking system, one of the drafters of the Constitution and the Federalist Papers, the father of Pan-Africanism is from here, one of the founders of San Francisco is from the Virgin Islands, a Secretary of State of the Confederacy, the planner of the Charleston, South Carolina slave rebellion, and the only black head of Tammany Hall in New York. Owned by 7 nations for our geographic, commercial, and production capability, it is our tremendous production of sugar during slavery, creating much more sugar per capita than any place else in the Caribbean, that created the wealth of Denmark, which allows it to be a leader in alternative energy, free health and education, and what is deemed to be some of the happiest people in the world. And now we remain a territory, but truly a colony of the United States. As such, unlike our sister islands, we don't have access to IMF, World Bank, Inter-America Bank, or funding resources like our independent sisters. And unlike our fellow territory, Puerto Rico, we don't have 4 or 5 members of Congress of Virgin Islands descent, or approximately 4 million people living in the mainland, concentrated in 2 or 3 states, forcing those members of those states and the House and the Senate to speak on their behalf. We have individuals like yourself, President Clinton, and our sponsors. The Virgin Islands has forums and initiatives like this, the Clinton Global Initiative, where the possibility in partnering with our government and our people is envisioned, discussed, and hopefully made a reality. For the Virgin Islands, and it's my thought most places, it is public-private partnerships that create the most sustainable and transformative growth. While I, as the federal representative of these islands, need your support in the fight in Washington to receive the funds to not only build, but to create a foundation for sustainable health systems, robust educational facilities, and social services and economic development, it is my hope that over the next few days, you will not only hear about our needs and our innate resilience and fortitude as a people, but the work of our university, the potentiality of our fiber optic and broadband, our transshipment and transportation capabilities, and the creative commitment of Virgin Islanders to place, culture, our ancestors, and the future of our people. So welcome. I now have the honor of introducing a Virgin Islander. Tom Secunda is one of our greatest sponsors here. From programmer, trader, system researcher, to co-founder of what was initially Innovative Market Systems and later became Bloomberg LLP, he has made his mark in work. But what's more important is his philanthropic work. He and his wife Cindy are great givers back, whether it's the American Israel Educational Fund, the National Parks Conservative Association, or right here in the Virgin Islands, and particularly on the island of St. John. Tom Secunda lends not only his money, his resources, but his heart and especially his mind. And we are grateful for it, and I'm so happy to have him a part of what a wonderful initiative this is going to be. Tom?
Good afternoon, everybody.